Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today on the psychology of employee engagement. My name is Charles Rogel and I'm the Director of Products and Marketing for DecisionWise, and I'll be the moderator for today's presentation. Our presenter today is Dr. David Mason.
Hello everyone.
David's a consultant and master trainer here at DecisionWise. He holds a doctorate degree in cognitive psychology from Columbia University, and he's been leading the development of our Engagement Magic training program. Prior to joining DecisionWise, David taught at the Department of Cognitive, Perceptual, and Brain Sciences at the University College in London. DecisionWise has been in business now since 1996. We focus on employee engagement, specifically conducting employee engagement surveys with our clients around the world, as well as providing training on employee engagement results and doing research on engagement. We've also recently published a book on employee engagement called Magic, the 5 Keys to Unlock the Power of Employee Engagement. I think many of you have probably seen our promotional materials along these lines. The book will be available in October, the 21st of October, but you can pre-order it now and I'll send you some more information. But a lot of the ideas and topics that we'll be discussing today are coming from the research from our book. This webinar today will last 30 minutes. Everyone will be on mute, and if you have questions, please submit them using the question feature on the toolbar. And a day or two after the webinar, I'll be sending out an email with the link to the slides, as well as the recording and some other information materials that we'll provide. So David, as we begin, let's talk about our agenda here today.
Okay, fantastic. So, like we said, the meeting's only here for half an hour. So this is a huge topic. It's so deep and there's so many things. So we're going to give you sort of the overview of a couple of main points that we find to be the most important when talking about employee engagement. These points are as follows. Number one, we want to talk about intrinsic and extrinsic engagement and how that's related to intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and whatnot. Then we want to talk about different types of engagement, such as trait, state, behavioral, how those play in, how we can change those, and so on. Then we want to talk about personality traits of an intrinsically engaged employee. So how you can facilitate those, how you can foster them, and when you just have to cut bait and say, well, this person doesn't have it, how can we get around that? And lastly, what people can do as managers, how you can influence other people to become more engaged, and the research we have on that.
Excellent. So let's start with, I guess, the definition that's kind of thrown around in psychology about engagement.
Okay, so engagement, believe it or not, is actually a relatively new topic in psychology. It made really its first appearance in about 1990 with research being done by Kahn on employee engagement and a lot of the research on flow from Csikszentmihalyi. Because of this, engagement doesn't have an established definition. There's a lot of people still working to define it, a lot of people still trying to say, well, I think it's more this, I think it's more this. For the most part, the things that are consistent are this idea of talking about work in how it relates to self. So it's this idea of taking your best self and allowing that role, your role as self, to bleed over into your role as employee and how you get the best part of yourself into that. So like we see here, energy, direction, persistence, proactivity, so on, things like that. The problem that we have is that we're defining things sort of ad hoc here. So when we say work, what does that even mean? What does it mean when you say, well, this is work? Well, I don't think it's work because I think this is fun. You know, I think I may be employed here, but I don't think of it as a job or a career or whatnot. What do we mean when we say engagement? There's all these types of things that go into it. So for the purposes of this, we've drawn from several different sources, and we've kind of come up with a working definition that we really like and we think is very effective, especially for the applicability to businesses. And that is engagement, as referring to employees. Employee engagement is an emotional state where employees feel passionate, energetic, committed to their work. So this is an affective state of being. It's feelings. It's not behavioral necessarily, but the behavior part of it is when the employees start giving their hearts, spirits, minds, and hands. So that's our version of engagement. The affective, which is the feeling of it, the behavioral, which is the actual actions that they're giving, the attitude, the creativity, and so on, that they're contributing to the organization.
And as we go forward here, we'll talk kind of about a third component, which we're not really defining here, which is more about that trait engagement or intrinsic engagement.
Yes, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about motivation.
Okay, so motivation, while not necessarily the same as engagement, is a huge part of engagement. Now, motivation itself is a squishy concept, and you can find 100 years of research saying, well, motivation is this, motivation is that. We're going to talk about it in the surface level of it. You know what I mean? We don't need to get into the philosophical implications. But motivation as intrinsic or extrinsic. Now, what I mean by that is intrinsic being internal motivation. I want to do something because I just want to. I feel good. I feel accomplished or whatnot. Extrinsic motivation is the kind of motivation where you're seeking for some sort of reward or avoiding a punishment. Now, the savvy among you will realize, well, if you're trying to do something for yourself, that's still a reward in some sense, or a punishment, and that you don't want to feel bad about yourself. And this is why it's important. People often talk about intrinsic or extrinsic as just opposite ends of the same spectrum. And one of the first things we want to talk about is intrinsic is its own line graph, and extrinsic is its own line graph. So you can be high in intrinsic motivation and high in extrinsic motivation. So for example, the job that I'm doing right now, I love this job. I would do it for free. Now, you'll never get me to do it for free because I'm also extrinsically motivated and I want that paycheck and I want those health benefits. But at the same time, I love doing what I'm doing. And so I'm very high on intrinsic and extrinsic. On the same token, you can be low on intrinsic and extrinsic, high on one, high on the other, low on the other. So that's an important way to first address motivation and things like that. Now, let's go into the value of these, good or bad. Oftentimes, you will see people, and this is a very accomplished audience from what I've seen, and you're all probably familiar with these terms, intrinsic, extrinsic, and I want to make sure that we give extrinsic a little more than it's due. Oftentimes, people talk about extrinsic motivation very pejoratively. They say, oh, extrinsic motivation, that's just, he's working for that reward and stuff like that. It's important to have. I like to think of it a lot of times as a guardrail on a mountain road. Now, would you want to drive on a windy, narrow road above this giant cliff without that guardrail? No, you wouldn't. You want that there. It's helpful. Now, on the flip side, are you going to count on that for every turn? You're just going to ride that rail the whole time. It wouldn't work that way. So extrinsic has its place. It's valuable. Sometimes you have to rely on it because you can't be intrinsically motivated all the time. Sometimes you get burned out. Sometimes you're just in a bad mood. Just being sick, your health is bad. You have to sort of rely on that extrinsic motivation to keep you going a lot of times. So let's not throw that out with the bathwater. Extrinsic is important. Now, here's the important part though. Intrinsic, so much better. Oh my gosh. It's ridiculous how much better intrinsic motivation is. I come from an education background as well as cognitive psychology. We use a lot of these things in helping students get better, how to get them more engaged. And one of the things that people always suggest is, hey, what if we just paid people for grades? Well, that works fantastically in the short term. People will work so hard for those great grades, but research shows suddenly they lose interest in the topic. Suddenly they expect more. These are the problems that come with that because when you rely on extrinsic motivations, when you rely on rewards or punishments, people adapt to them. They call this the adaptation principle. And so what happens is if I give you $1 for an A, the next time you want to get that A, you're asking for $2. If you're an employee, you're saying...
Sounds like my kids.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it works with employees as well. Say, hey, you know what? If you work hard, we'll give you this bonus. Well, suddenly they're used to that bonus. If they don't get it, they're going to be ticked off. If they do get it, they're going to say, well, you know, I was already expecting that bonus. I'd like a bigger bonus this time. If you rely on that too much... Now, again, I'm not saying that's bad. You know, give your employees bonuses. Everyone loves that. But if you rely on that in order to motivate your employees, it's eventually going to fail. It's a short-term solution. If you want the long-term solution, you have to figure out a way to motivate people intrinsically. We talk about this as management theory X, management theory Y. Management theory X is the idea that employees are essentially just horses in old-timey London cabs. You know, you gotta whip them to keep them going. You gotta spur them. You gotta use a bridle. If that feels comfortable to you, which I imagine it doesn't, then maybe this isn't the seminar, the webinar for you. If you feel, on the other hand, that people are naturally good, they want to do good work, if you give them a chance, they will give their best. If you think more positively, more optimistically, that's theory Y. That's where you say, hey, you know what? Let's give you some autonomy and see if you can do your best self. Let's put you in the best position to succeed. So that's the difference here on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Those are the big things that we get from this section.
So let's move over to this path towards engagement and this formula that you have here.
Okay, so one of the findings that we've had, like we've been in business for several years of doing specific engagement research, and one of the things we've found is that you can make the job the most fantastic job in the world, but if it doesn't meet certain psychological needs, people will not be engaged. Now, having researched millions of people here, the psychological needs that we have found that have risen to the top are these 5 that you see on the screen: meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. So if you have a job and the job conditions are set, you're getting paid enough, your job is safe, you don't have to worry about your safety, you're getting all those basic job conditions met, and you have all these psychological needs met, these together lead to engagement. And then engagement leads to performance. This is going back to what we were talking about earlier. Engagement is the feeling, performance is that outcome sort of thing. It's because of the self-determination that they're able to find meaning in what they do. They're autonomously doing things. Now the problem here is if you take those away, suddenly you've got a job, it's a fantastic job, you're getting paid enough, you're safe, they might even have a foosball table in the break room, you got Taco Tuesday, you've got all these things, but you're missing those psychological needs. Now suddenly, what's motivating people? Well, you're missing all that intrinsic motivation. You're missing that long-term connection to the job itself, to the work. And what are you left with? You're left with job conditions and people essentially cracking the whip. This is what we call controlled motivation, or in other words, amotivation. And let me explain amotivation real quick. That isn't just apathy or laziness. You might still be very active. In fact, you might be as active as someone who's engaged. However, your activity is in a different direction. It's focused differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so in other words, you're working for your paycheck, working for the weekend kind of thing, putting in your time, but your heart's really not into your work.
Exactly, and we call that reactive autonomy. So the idea is, have you ever told someone, well, this is the whole basis of reverse psychology, right? Hey, don't you say that. Well, they're going to say it. Don't you come over here. They're going to come over here. Don't you cross that line. What are they going to do? They're going to cross the line. Everyone reacts to taking away their autonomy in a way so that they can prove their autonomy, so that they can show that they're still agentic beings, that they aren't in control. And so when you do that as a company, what happens is their motivation goes from I want to do what's best for the company to I want to do what's best for myself. Now, if you're lucky, those are still in line. I still give my best effort, but I'm doing it for a paycheck and so on. Where the problem arises is where the company's goals differ from the individual's goals. So if the company says, hey, I want you to put in 8 hours of your best business, of your best work, what you hear is, if I put in 8 hours, I get my paycheck. And so suddenly they're checking Facebook, they're taking laps around the office, oh, hey, how are you doing, and they're finding ways to waste time. We talk about this in terms of when you're looking at the clock. Are you watching the clock or are you racing the clock? Are you watching it to say, oh, man, like just another 10 minutes, I'm out of here? Or are you racing it? Oh, man, I've only got 10 minutes left to get all the stuff done I want to do. This is the difference, and what separates those two attitudes is the inclusion of those psychological needs. That's how you get the engagement there.
So let's talk about these engagement constructs, because this was really interesting to me. A lot of times we throw around the term engagement, we just think it's someone who's highly motivated, but there's actually different levels to engagement that we need to address.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk a lot about in psychology is the idea that feelings can't last forever. And we use that oftentimes as a positive one when someone's going through anxiety or depression. We say, you know what, that won't last forever. There's cycles. You'll feel depressed for a while and then you come back out of it. On the same token, when you're feeling really good, you kind of have to say, hey, you can't keep that feeling forever. Like this is what we tell people when they first get married, That feeling,
the
honeymoon phase, it's going to come down and it'll come back up. But if it comes down, that isn't a problem. Feelings tend to adjust cyclically, right? Now, there's a certain amount of the population, about 10% in our research that we found, that their trait engagement, for whatever reason, they're engaged all the time. It doesn't matter what it is. You could give them the worst job in the world. You could say anything you want. They're going to be engaged and they're going to give you the best effort they can. Now, we all have parts of this. I don't know anyone that has zero engagement potential whatsoever. But there's about 10% of the population that just doesn't matter. You could come to work, you kick them on the way in, and they'll say, thank you, sir, you just made me realize how good it is to not be kicked. And they do really well. Those are the people you never have to worry about. You just point them in the right direction, and then you go.
Those real annoying positive people around the office, right?
You say that, but you're one of these people, Kevin. And so this is one of the things that we do as a company is we try and help people maximize their trade engagement because that's the easiest way to do it. Now, the next part of engagement is state engagement, and this is where about 80% of the people fall. This is, you put them in the right situation, they're going to be engaged. You get them doing something they like doing, you get them working with people they like, you put them in a cool environment, they're going to be engaged. And it lasts about as long as that particular task or state is. Now, this is really good, and this is what we want to focus on because this is the greatest opportunity for growth in getting people to be more engaged, is creating more of that environment so that they can be more engaged, if that makes sense. And so this is where you get people absorbed in their job because you make their job absorbing. Then you got to make sure their satisfaction is taken care of because then they can move on, you know? So things like that. Now, when you have state engagement, what that leads to is behavioral engagement, which is the ultimate goal. This is what we want. These are the people that are going out of their way. We call it extra role behavior. Other people talk about it in terms of organizational citizenship behavior. This is where you come in a little bit early, you leave a little late. Or even if you don't do that, the work you do is more efficient. Think right now, search in your heart, everyone that's listening, anyone right now. If you're doing a task, there's two different ways to do it. There's the I'm accomplishing the task, and then there's the I'm really killing this task kind of feeling. You know what I mean? How do you get to that point? That's the behavioral engagement that we're trying to achieve. That feeling, that's what we're talking about.
So the two separations we have here is that the trade engagement piece is really the predisposition of individuals. That's what they kind of come to work with. But the other two are influenced by the organization and leaders.
Exactly. And that's one of those things that there's this story. It can be on anything. There's this story that we have from one of our clients. It was in manufacturing. It was this guy who'd been doing this menial job for about 20 years, and he loved it. And a lot of other people in his place didn't. Now, this wasn't trade engagement because this individual wasn't like this with everything. But for whatever reason, that part of his job he loved. He would take his breaks to go down to the assembly line, work on the machine, oil it, grease it, make sure that everything was working perfectly, get everything in order. That's how he spent his breaks because he was so happy with his role right there. That is one of those things that we study so that we can then say, what does he have and how can we apply it to other people?
So let's dig into trade engagement a little bit more. We've listed here 4 attributes or psychological terms that kind of describe someone that has a lot of trade engagement.
Yeah, and a lot of you will be very familiar with these terms. They lump them all together, and this is how you get that trade engagement. Now, like I said, about 10% of the people have this naturally, but that doesn't mean we can't train it into people. Like, for example, the very first thing, locus of control. This is the idea of, do you influence your environment, or does your environment influence you? This goes back to Seligman and dog experiments and all sorts of things about dogs avoiding electrical shocks. When they think that they're helpless, they don't because they can't change anything. But the dogs that didn't have that helplessness realize, oh, all I have to do is walk over here, I can avoid that electrical shock. Employees, people, we're all the exact same. If we can start realizing our effect on the environment, then we can have that internal locus of control. That's something you can develop. It's a way of reframing the things that happen. The next one we have here is positive affectivity. This is one that we definitely look for in terms of when we're hiring for our own company. We look for people who have that optimism, that deal with problems in a certain way, that look for how to interact with people. They look at things as positive rather than a challenge. They look at it as fun rather than a chore, things like that. And this goes into auto-tailored personality, which is one of my favorite ones to work with people. This is the propensity to turn bad stress into good stress. You know how some people thrive on that challenge? You could look at sports. Like if you give me 2 seconds left and I have to make both free throws to win the game, I would freeze, I would hate it, I would have an anxiety attack. Some people thrive on that challenge, right? And this is one of those things that is really useful as a company, especially if you're trying to hire for personality and things like that. We had someone we hired just in our own company recently. He was up for his job interview. I said, okay, this is an unusual question. We use it in decision-making research a lot. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I want you to tell me how many things you can come up with that you can use a brick for. And he was like, oh, okay, you can use it to build stuff like that. Now, a lot of people, this is what weeds them out. They'll come up with 5 things. You can build a wall, you can use it as a doorstop, and then they kind of just give up. This is a stupid question. I don't even know why you're asking me. This guy, however, thought, oh, you know what? It could be the star of a movie, a really boring movie. Or you could use it, you could grind it up, and you could use it as dust, and then you could use that to paint or dye and stuff like that. He took off with this thing. And I'll tell you what, he's been fantastic in our company ever since then. People with this personality trait, this autotelic, where they look at challenges as something to overcome rather than endure, are huge in terms of creating engagement. This last one, work orientation, pretty self-explanatory. People look at their jobs, and this is how you frame it again. Is it a job? Is it employment? Is it a career? Is it somewhere you at least want to stay? Or is it your calling? Is it something you feel compelled to do? When you ask people these questions, their answers are always very telling and very predictive of engagement.
So now we move on to this, the state engagement piece here, and we're really referring to our own engagement model, which kind of ties these concepts together. You've talked a lot about those factors that go into satisfaction. You talked a lot about those 5 keys of engagement here. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we separate these and the differences?
Okay, absolutely. So this is one of the big problems that we have when we talk about squishy definitions, is a lot of managers think they're talking about engagement and they try and improve engagement, but they haven't defined it correctly, and they end up just working on satisfaction. Satisfaction are those job conditions that we talked about: pay, safety, respect, things like that. Those basic things that are just part and parcel of having a job. If you don't have those, man, that's a pretty terrible job. But we want to go beyond that. So you have to have satisfaction in place. And other than just a couple of exceptions, satisfaction needs to be in place before they can move on and go into engagement. Engagement is what we've been talking about. It's involving your heart, spirits, minds, and hands. And if we can look at those particular elements of engagement, the 5 elements, the 5 psychological needs, there's meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. Each one of these is a psychological need that you as a person or you as a leader can switch. It's a lever that you can pull. You give someone more meaning, their engagement goes up. More autonomy, their engagement goes up. Growth, their engagement goes up. Each one of these is important in increasing engagement. They're not mutually exclusive, or they're not they're not necessary but not sufficient. Like, you can have some but not another. They all just work in concert to help improve your engagement.
So at this point, David, what I'd like to do is launch a poll for everyone to participate in. So stop checking your email, come back to the webinar now, and take a moment to respond to the poll that we have showing on the screen. What we're trying to determine is which of these 5 keys is really most important to you. And we've done this on multiple webinars, and it's always interesting to see the responses that we get from people. It gives us a good idea of where people's heads are and what they think. We realize we haven't given you a complete definition of each of these components, but we're curious to get a rough idea of which of these is most important in your work. So I'll leave this open for the next few minutes, allow you to take some time to complete the poll here, and then I'll show the results. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. Oh, one moment.
So the thing is, we'd love to explain more of what each one of these is. This is a huge, deep field of research and activities. In fact, so deep that we have an entire day-long training devoted to specifically these 5 psychological needs.
Now, it's interesting, David, because you can see that meaning and impact are the 2 highest scoring items. That's somewhat similar to other results that we've seen in the past.
Absolutely. And in fact, the thing that you guys don't know, if you ever come to one of our trainings, you will. Meaning and impact are very closely related. Meaning is that feeling that you're working for something bigger than yourself. Impact is that idea that you're actually accomplishing that. So impact is being able to see how much of a difference you're making on whatever it is that's important to you. And that's a very basic psychological need. You give people more of that, they will be more engaged. I mean, that's the only way to explain things like dangerous jobs like being a policeman or a firefighter. Mm-hmm. How do you run into a burning building unless you believe that what you're doing is more important than your own safety?
Who gets paid enough to do that?
Exactly, right?
So let's transition now to a manager's role in engagement.
Okay. This is where the science, we step down from our ivory tower for a little bit. We step down from our literature reviews and we say, what can we do to actually help now? And there's three things I think as a leader you can do in engagement. Number one, well, kind of 3.5. I'll give you the half first. Number one is just understand engagement. Understand it fully so you can recognize it and you can help. And this is partly what we were talking about today. Define it correctly, know everything about it. Now, the three main points that we want you to take home from here, though, are number one, hire engaged people. That's just easiest step one, right? Or at least not necessarily engaged people, but the people who have the potential to be engaged. The ones that have the autotelic personality, the positive affect, the locus of control, things like that. Now, it's tough in interviews because, everyone's always on their best behavior. So how do you tell? The best way to do that we find, is if you think of an interview as a scientific study with a sample of one, you better make that sample of one the most accurate sample you can. So you give them complex situations, have them actually do work, see how they work with those challenges and work through those complex situations. That's going to be your best way to do that. Number two thing you can do as a leader, create and maintain an engaging environment. And this is what we were talking about. This is the deepest part. This is how do you get those 5 psychological needs, meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, connection, magic. How do you get those things into your company? How can you provide that fertile field for those 5 needs? Now, it's not always going to be the case that you can max each one out, and this is where the devil's in the details, and this is why, by all means, follow up with us, research more of our stuff. We have other webinars devoted specifically to this, because this is a huge area to improve. Now, number 3, get out of the way. One of the things we found in our research, we studied thousands and thousands of managers, and we found that a manager's engagement has 0 effect on an employee's engagement. Managers cannot cause an employee's engagement. You have to get out of the way. You create the environment, you create the culture, but then it's up to them. It's their choice. And so take a step back, relinquish a little bit of that control. I know that causes anxiety, but you got to relinquish a little bit to allow them to grow, to step into that space.
So now we're talking about behavioral engagement. And so how do you tell, I guess, when somebody's engaged? This is kind of the outcomes that we're looking for.
Well, there's 2 things to look for here, when someone's engaged and when someone's not engaged. So the first one, when someone's engaged, that's usually pretty easy to tell. If I said right now, think of the person who's most engaged and a couple of people in your office that are most engaged, you could probably do it pretty quickly. Oh, this guy always seems to go out of his way. He's always happy. But some of the things that you can tell in yourself, at least, when you come home from work, do you find yourself worn out, or do you find yourself really kind of happy and more energized? And I guess that's an easy way to look at it. Think of it after a basketball game. You're worn out, you gave everything you had, but you won and you're happy about it, right? Even though you can't walk or go upstairs anymore. It's that kind of feeling of energy and happiness that comes. If you're not getting that, maybe reflect on it. Some of the other behavioral things you can do to test when you're not engaged, how much you take care of personal time on the clock. Are you checking Facebook? Are you writing shopping lists? Things like that. Do you use I instead of we? You know what I mean? Like, I have to do this rather than we, the company, have to do this. And again, watching the clock versus rating the clock. These are things that you can look for, little triggers that you can always say, oh, I'm checking Facebook again. What am I trying to avoid? Why am I not engaged? And you can reevaluate your magic.
So finally, how do you become engaged personally?
Well, the biggest thing here is that it's a choice. You have to make the choice. Now, it's hard to make the choice if you don't know how, and this is a lot of what we've been talking about. But you have to make that choice. So you ask yourself a couple of questions. What engages you at work? When do you find yourself being pumped up? When do you find yourself putting in that extra effort, going that extra mile? Now ask yourself, how often are you doing those activities versus other activities? Is it a majority of the time? Do you almost never get to do those engaging activities? If that's the case, what's happening? How can you get more of those peak experiences? You'd be surprised how many success stories we hear when an employee just goes to their manager and says, hey, I'd like to do more of this type of work. Oh, more often than not, the manager says, fantastic, absolutely. Now, not every situation allows that, and this is where framing comes in. You might have a tough situation, but if you frame it a different way, if you look at it from a different angle, if you say, I'm not, busting my hump 12-hour days at a job that I hate just to make money. I'm doing it so I can send my kid to college. Still doing the same behavior, but you framed it differently, and that helps with engagement as well.
And we have a lot of other resources here, David, that we can share. In fact, let me move on to the next screen here. So that kind of concludes our presentation. David, thank you very much. There are additional resources that I'll provide you as part of this webinar today. One is an opportunity to take our Engagement Magic self-assessment. So this is a 35-question assessment that measures your own level of engagement, but also tells you the level or your score for each of the different magic keys. And so I'll send you a link to this online assessment. You can see a sample of it here. You can see that I am fully engaged with my score in the 92nd percentile there. But you all have an opportunity to go through and test yourself. It's a free assessment. You just go online and take it. You can actually take it as many times as you like to see what your engagement level is on any particular day.
How it fluctuates.
Right, and feel free to share it with other people as well. The second thing I wanted to talk about is that if you're interested in learning more about this concept, this magic training that we have an open enrollment training happening next week. It's on Tuesday. I realize this is short notice for many of you, but if you're local, you'll be able to attend. It'll be in Park City, Utah. The trees right now look about that color. However, there's no snow on the mountain up in Park City, but it's a beautiful location, and we'd love to have you attend, and I'll send some other information about other open enrollment trainings that we have coming up. And of course, we have the book. The book's available on Amazon, also other online retailers. In fact, you can see, you can read an excerpt from the book at Amazon right now, and I'll send you a link to that so you have that information. Well, we appreciate everyone attending today. We look forward to having you join us on a future webinar. If you have questions, please let me know. But David, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.